So first thing I want to talk about is our events upcoming for 2022. Obviously, this year we continued everything via Zoom and kept them virtual. The board realizes that we have a lot more attendees when we get to do something virtual versus having something in person. So we are very much looking to return to in-person events in 2022, along with a component of virtual as well. So we don't lose those attendees. We want as many people to be involved and updated on what's happening with the CRHS, as well as learning from our wonderful presenters that we have for the meetings. So here you can see tentative dates for our meetings in 2022. If you have a suggestion of a location that you would like us to have a meeting, please email us, send us a note, give us a call. I'm curious to know of different and new places that we can possibly have meetings that you think would help promote the society and possibly gain new membership. The quarterly is shipping out, and one of the things I continue to push, and I will say it here again, is the importance of our oral history. We are losing Conrail veterans at an incredibly staggering rate. And with them goes the knowledge, the stories, the information that they have. We need to be acting now to save that information and those stories and that history just as much as we need to be acting now to save equipment. I would propose that the stories and that information is almost more important than the equipment when trying to tell the story of Conrail and the legacy and how Conrail rose from the ashes to become the profitable company and innovator in the railroad industry that it was. So I will continue to push that over and over. It's what my entire blog is about in the new quarterly coming out. But it's very easy. You can pick up a paper and a pen. You can do a voice memo on your phone. The tools are so easy and right at your fingertips to be able to record a story or something that you may know, or to go to someone else and I guarantee you start the questions and the stories are going to follow. So it's really not that hard, but incredibly important. And I just want to keep hammering that home. Holidays are coming up, so please help support the CRHS in the shop. There's books, there's even some used books that we received from a collection, some older books that maybe you'd be interested in, calendar, books, decals, maybe even a gift membership for next year. So please check that out. Had some, I want to thank, I know John McLaughlin is on here. I want to thank him personally for going through hundreds of diagrams and blueprints for us and getting them ready for the archives. Just a kind of a pre-triage, getting them ready. But we received some wonderful donations, and I appreciate, John, your time going through those and getting those to us. They are now all in the archives and will be assessed in the future as we get the museum open and the archives running at full speed. We also received a slide collection from the J. David Ingalls family of the Conrail slides that he had within his collection. We viewed them as a board of directors. I kind of just threw them up and we went through them very quickly. There's some wonderful, wonderful images in there, and we can't wait to get those online for all to see as well in the future. And with that, it leads me to, I want to thank Ed Kabazinski for his work. Ed has been with the organization since the beginning. And honestly, he doesn't get the thanks and praise that he deserves, because what he does, nobody really sees. What he is doing for the website, for making sure the photo archives are running well, the functionality of them. He's always looking for ways to improve them, and he continues to do so. And the next big project is doing that with the archives. We've been doing some kind of beta testing on those sorts of things, working out problems, making them better. But in the future, that's going to be available to everyone as well. That information is at your fingertips, because having an archives doesn't really help anyone if nobody gets to see what's in there. So kudos to Ed, because he doesn't get the praise that he is deserved, because really no one gets to see the work that he's doing and the technical side of things. So I did want to reach out to those couple things moving forward. We've got a bunch of other updates, so I'm going to keep this brief and keep moving on. But Carolyn is next with our membership information. So have at it, Carolyn.
All right. Sorry. Hi, guys. So we ended 2021 with 446 members, 131 of which were sustainers, which is huge, huge. We saw a lot of people go from standard to sustaining over 21, and I think we're going to see more in 22. 22 renewals are out. We have had a bunch of people. I don't have the number right in front of me, but we have had a number of people already renew. If you do not renew, oh, there we go, 138. Thank you, Rudy. If you do not renew by the 31st, you will miss the first quarterly. So if you're planning on being a 22 member, get in there and renew. There is a paper membership renewal in your quarterly. You can always do it online at the conrailshop.com, SHOPPE, if anybody doesn't know. Or email me directly. My email is here at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, if you need a form, if you're not sure about the online system, send me an email. I'm more than happy to help with any of that. Should be more than enough ways for people to do their renewals. If you want to send a check-in or if you want to do it online, either way, it's fine with us. Rudy's already stressing over what the quarterly is going to look like for next year, because he's got more stuff than he has room in the quarterly, so it's always a good problem to have. And that's kind of where we're at the moment.
All right, Rudy, you can kind of follow through with the rest of the updates here, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So as Brock mentioned earlier, the quarterly has gone out. Actually, I got mine yesterday, so hopefully if you haven't gotten it yet, you should get it the next day or two. I know digital copies went out about a week or two ago as well. This is the cover of it. There's not a whole lot to show here that isn't already in the magazine. So when you get it, it should be there next day or two. Next thing is the shop. We do have Chip Sim's new book in stock, although I think we're down to one of them, and I just ordered more of them because people keep buying them. Good problem to have. We do have the 2022 calendars. We sold almost 100 of them already. And we only ordered 300 of them, so if you haven't gotten one yet, grab them. Last year we did sell out, so. Brock mentioned this briefly. This is some of the diagrams that John went through, and also one in the bottom right that he didn't see yet. But we got a good chunk of donations from the Pennsylvania Railroad Technical and Historical Society. That's the two upper ones, including a paint diagram for a FlexiFlow and a paint diagram for an RS3. Not an RS3M, notably. And the bottom right is a diagram from Don Altman that he donated to us. All of these have been scanned, although, well, the ones we picked out for scanning have been scanned, let's put it that way. There's well over 1,000 diagrams, and most of them are the original hand-drawn diagrams from which blueprints were made. So we have the originals in our collection, and we've started scanning at least some of the ones that we get a lot of requests for, like lettering diagrams and stuff from manufacturers. So those are now scanned and are available for research. This past weekend, depending on who you ask, Ed Kapuzinski single-handedly moved every signal in our collection into our storage unit in Shippensburg.
Notice there are no photos of it.
Yeah. Now, okay. To be fair to Ed, we did actually witness him doing manual labor, but there's no photographic evidence of that. So I would still contend it didn't happen. He's not here to defend himself either, which is even better. But yeah, so we had a Lackawanna signal that was in my shed. And we had, I think 3 or 4 New York Central signals, basically the components for at least 2 Penn State signals and near semaphore that were in Doug Horton's shed. So all of that stuff has made it to our storage unit in Shippensburg, and is being staged there in preparation for eventual display. We measured the semaphore and determined it will fit inside the boxcar, standing up, fully assembled. So it probably will end up in there. The other stuff we're still kind of determining what we want to do with it. We've talked about using the Lackawanna signal perhaps as a door indicator, because it only has 2 aspects. Have it light up red when the door's closed or door's locked, and green when the museum's open. But yeah, so that happened this past Saturday, and my back is still screaming from it. This is kind of a look into the part of the collection that doesn't get a whole lot of sunshine. So we do have a lot of signals in our collection. Speaking of the Boxcar, that's what it looks like right now. It was painted, I guess, the first week of September or so, and lettered in the subsequent week. All the lettering was provided from photos from our archives or measurements from our archives, or in one case, the actual diagram for this boxcar was very helpful, although it didn't have every piece of lettering on it, but it had most of them. So this is how the boxcar looks currently. We're waiting for probably a good hard freeze to move the boxcar the last 300 feet to its final resting place and put it back on its trucks. Trucks are already there. Panel track is already there and installed. We just need to move it across a soccer field, and we're trying not to rip the soccer field up. So if we wait for the ground to freeze, we can do that without destroying the field. But yeah, so that's how the car looks currently. It is in Shippensburg. It is about 300 feet from where it needs to go. We hope to have that done hopefully by the end of the year, but we'll see how the weather cooperates. And then hopefully in the spring we'll be able to start working on the interior. And I think we're still at this point shooting for a late 2022 opening date. Depending on weather and contractors and whatever else may impede the process at this point. As you may recall, we acquired this boxcar in January of 2020 with the ambition to start working on it in the middle of 2020, and that didn't really work out so well. So this is where it stands currently. And just a quick update on the rest of our equipment. Everything's kind of exactly where it was as of the last meeting. The only change is that we have moved. The speeder has been retrieved from Michigan and is now at John Gouldy's house in central Pennsylvania. And that will eventually get moved somewhere and get displayed. But everything else is basically as it was in July. The 165 has been operating on the Allentown and Auburn. The 130 is still at the Sturbridge line waiting for restoration. The Triple Crown trailer is in Weatherly, Pennsylvania, stored at the moment. The 8905 has been getting some use around the shop in Baltimore. And the FlexiFlow that we acquired with Danbury Railroad Historical Society is there and awaiting restoration. You'll notice in the couple slides back, I had the lettering diagram for FlexiFlow hoppers, so you can kind of see where that's going. And I think that's about it. So
I will quickly mention that you saw some damage on the walkover on the boxcar. That is being replaced. We have a new one on the way. Some of that damage occurred when a piece failed during the actual move on the rear of the wrecker as we were going around the tightest curve on the route that we had to take. So just a minor little thing, new one on the way. I had some questions about that. So just, if you saw that new one on the way, and it'll look brand new here as soon as that is with us. So, Wes, you want to kind of get us started here on the office car book, which many of you have been receiving in the past 2 weeks. Reviews right out of the gate have been very positive with what people are seeing just perusing through. I know I'm very excited to hear, you know, a month down the road, what people think after they've been through the whole book. And there's something in there for a little bit, you know, everyone. There's different sections, and Wes, I'll kind of hand it off to you so we can get going on this.
Great, excellent. Hey everybody. So starting off on our first slide here, I absolutely love this picture from Larry DeYoung. You know, whenever people think about business trains, they usually picture E's and F's and heavyweight passenger cars and observation cars going around beautiful bends, really picturesque stuff. But the reality is that they were beautiful, but there's also a much deeper story there. And that is that those trains were all about connecting people. And so that whether that was customers, managers, politicians, even the general public even got to ride on these trains. So these trains were about connecting people. And if I had to pick one picture that I think does a really good job of explaining the purpose of the trains itself, I think this photo does it. So this is Charlie Marshall and Warner Clark, both Conrail managers, looking at a system map in the rear of the theater car, which was Conrail number 9. One of the things I love about this is that is just one big sheet of glass, and you can see the drop off as they inspect the system map for Conrail there. So with that said, we're going to jump off to, I think everybody knows who Brock is. Probably not as many people know who I am, mainly because I've avoided social media for the most part. And then when I could get it, I couldn't use my real name anyway, because they don't believe my last name. It actually is Reminder. That is correct. not a typo in our book. So Brock and I met through the Historical Society many years ago. You know, we both loved the special equipment fleet very much. That, you know, that was something that carried through our lives for a long time, but probably since we were in our teens. You can see the picture of Brock here on a 4022 holding the number boards that were just given to him from the Levins, which is awesome. And you'll see a picture of me sitting in the former Southern observation car, which was Conrail number 1. So since Brock and I met through the Conrail Historical Society all those years ago, one of the things that Brock had been working on was amassing an absolutely huge collection of items related to the train. And I was out researching and modeling and collecting whatever Brock had not yet found, which was not much. He didn't leave me much. 2 interesting facts about this. I just said with Brock, you know, holding on to those number boards for the engine he's actually climbing on right there. And the picture of me in Southern Railway 1 or Southern Railway office car, Conrail 1. None of that stuff is there. It's all been completely removed. So nothing exists, including the windows. There's nothing left of that car. It's been rebuilt. So that's kind of who I am. We already know who Brock is. So I'll give you a little bit of a background. I got this message in 2018, and it was from somebody named Foxy. And I had no idea who Foxy was, but he reached out to me and was talking about one of the office cars, the roof of that office car. So when he wrote this, he said something in his post here that was really interesting to me, and that was, it said, lots of stories. Yes, that's the best PowerPoint animation I can give you. That's about as good as it gets. But he did talk about something called lots of stories, and it really sparked my interest. And I wanted to know more about these trains. I had, let's see, we'll move on to the next slide here. So one of the things that I had been doing was I had written a website a long time ago, probably around the Conrail split, actually, early 2000s, somewhere in there. I had made a website, and it featured a bunch of pictures and some of the information I had on the office cars. So I recently rebuilt that website, ConrailOCS.com. So I started writing stories about all the equipment again. And now with this newfound connection through Foxy, I was getting little bits of information that just made me want to know even more and more and more about this stuff. So while Brock was out getting a large collection, I was out writing about this stuff. We both came together through Rudy earlier in 2020. And basically I said, you know, if I can write a website about this equipment, why can't we make a book? So reaching out to Rudy, Rudy said, have you talked to Brock recently? I said, I haven't. So the two of us joined forces, and here we are today. The end result of joining forces was over 2.5 terabytes full of images on external drives that I've got here at my house. Many of those were scanned, that I actually scanned. So we have just about any picture you can imagine of the equipment. If I could have made a book that included all 2.5 terabytes, I would have. I don't think Rudy would have liked that too much. We spent 50 hours talking to Conrail employees, and that was where this book was no longer just about people. It started, or no longer just about steel. It started to turn into the story of the people that use the equipment. The end result, of course, is 416 pages. So if you haven't picked it up yet, I think we still have some copies. Feel free to pick that up. But again, I go back to this emphasis that was stories about the train from those who worked on or wrote it. So the book actually focuses on people's own words. And in some cases, it was, why rewrite it? I didn't have to rewrite anything. Why not just take what they said? It was so good and use it right there in the book. So that's what we walked away with, was this wasn't just about steel anymore. But of course, there's lots of information about the history of the train, and there's lots of steel included in the train in the book for sure. And that's where we're going to start off this evening. So many of you already know, I don't think I'm talking to anybody new here, but you know, many people already know what the fleet was for. Conrail did a pretty good job of describing that for us, and that was that these cars tested the condition of the track and allowed Conrail's management to inspect the right-of-way and facilities at the ground level, showing customers and potential customers exactly how their freight was going to move. And I love this particular shot because you can kind of see those two things side by side. You've got, you know, those C40-8Ws with a coal train off to the side while an office car special passes by inspecting that route. One of the great things about those 50 hours worth of interviews with people was getting to talk to some really awesome people like Jim Hagan. So Jim Hagan was the CEO. That was an absolute honor of my lifetime. And Brock was on that as well. The two of us getting a chance to talk with Jim Hagan was absolutely incredible about his time on the system, including when he first got involved with Conrail, when he left, how he got back, all that great stuff. So that was an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to him. In this particular photo, you can see on the very far left, you can see car attendant Larry Lester. He's got a lot of pins on his hat. A lot of the car attendants that worked on the train collected these pins that would be created specifically for the trains. So you can see Larry Lester off to the left there. You can see Michael Kennedy, who is off to the far right here. Michael Kennedy was the executive chef, and he also worked closely hand in hand with Ted Kennedy as well. So that was our chef for the train. And then you can see right here in this pattern shirt, Mr. Hagan, who was the CEO. And this particular shot was taken on the very last board of directors trip. Of course, we can't forget when we talk about the equipment, it's always easy to forget the fact that there was other green equipment and other people working on stuff that was not specifically for the office cars. And this was the track measurement train. That's why our title is as lengthy as it is, because we're talking about a lot of different stuff with different purposes. And the track measurement train had its own purpose, which was to collect track geometry and rail wear data over the Conrail system. That information basically ended up with assisting Philadelphia in long range track maintenance planning. So here you can see a picture of the geometry car fresh out of the Beech Grove shops. So the book is organized in a couple, and basically what we do with the first is we talk about the purpose of the train, which we just did, and then we talked about the different years. So what we did is we said the early years, we've got the build years, we've got the Altoona years, and then we go into stories and we end with equipment history. So we'll start right where the book starts, which is the early years. I love this particular shot. This is of 4022 in Harrisburg, a site that you can no longer get pictures of. That location's completely gone. The early passenger roster for the office car special, and actually the research equipment as well, was fairly small. Right when Conrail came around in 1976, you can see that they had several heavyweight observation cars, which was 1, 2, 3, 4. If you include 10 in there, was also a parlor observation car. So they had a bunch of platform cars. They had one sleeper that came from the Erie Lackawanna, and then they had Conrail 20, which was a research car that came from Penn Central. So you can see here that all of the equipment came from Penn Central, with the exception of the Erie Lackawanna sleeper car. All of the equipment on the early fleet was painted black with blue underbodies. It was also interesting to note that some of this equipment, when it first arrived on Conrail, was not used as much, and there's good reasons for that. Jim Hagan told us a story about, he said, at a time that Conrail was losing over $1 million per day, that's kind of hard to fathom, but they were losing $1 million per day. He said he couldn't just get behind the idea that, and I'm speaking about from Jim Hagan telling us about Edward Jordan. He was talking about he just couldn't get behind the idea that a bunch of officials were going to get on these business cars that had cooks and waiters and car attendants to go out and look at the railroad. So he said that the USRA was the watchdog for Conrail. And if they said you were spending too much money, it would end up in the newspaper, and being out in a bunch of office cars would be kind of hard to refute that you weren't spending a lot of money. So understandably, Edward Jordan, the first CEO, really didn't want any unneeded attention. Jim told us, he said, compared to some railroads, we just didn't use the train as much because of the cash restraints. And you can see right here, these two office cars sitting in Reading at Conrail 4 and Conrail 1, and they were actually sold pretty quickly off the roster. Some of the cars, this one being Conrail 3, also were in need of some tender loving care, I guess you should say. We were able to talk with Bill Koff, and Bill Koff told us great stories about the rewiring of this one particular car and how they had to basically, they started and stopped it depending on the day or the month. At one point, the electricians at the shop basically said, the next time they call and tell us to stop working on this car or to start working on it, we're going to cut all the wires. And after that, then we can't stop working on it. We're going to have to fix it. And that's exactly what they did. The executives at Conrail did call up one more time and say, start working on that car again. They did, and they cut all the wires. And sure enough, they called back and said, stop working on it. And by that time, it was too late. So interestingly enough, though, this particular car did make it all the way to the end of Conrail in 1999. Another interesting thing about this picture is the fact that this car was in Philadelphia. So a lot of the, all of the office cars on Conrail on that very first early roster were all over the place. Conrail 20 was originally based out of Cleveland, Ohio, which is where the technical services lab was. And the rest of the cars were spread across the system. You could sometimes find some of those cars in Washington, D.C. or Chicago or in Philadelphia here, and sometimes even at the Reading shop. So it just depended. But they did not have one particular home. They were all over the system to begin with. And the same thing goes for the 4022. The 4022 E8A was roaming the system. If it wasn't pulling these, it was pulling Amtrak trains, it was pulling commuter trains, just depended. But the early Conrail special equipment fleet was all over the place. So recapping that real quick, everything else on Conrail needed attention. Everything, the track needed attention, the locomotives needed attention, and the office cars equipment was no different. According to Jim Hagan, the railroad was losing money every single day, and they didn't use the equipment very often. Those 2 office cars I sold you earlier, which were Conrail 1 and Conrail 4, were eventually sold off. But the biggest change that was coming was actually just around the corner at the end of this era for Conrail, and that was that Edward G. Jordan was stepping down and L. Stanley Crane was coming from the Southern Railway to become Conrail's new CEO. And it was at that point that things really started to turn around. So the next chapter in the book talks about the build era from 1982 to 1991. So leading up to the build era, we just talked about the fact that, on January 1st, 1981, Stanley Crane became CEO. It was at this time or shortly thereafter that all of the office cars started to find a new home, and they started to bring all the equipment to the Reading shops in Reading, Pennsylvania. This building still stands, and Brock and I had a chance to go visit that this past summer. It was pretty cool to see the numbers there. Track 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all still on that brick, although probably not as crisp as that, but the building does exist, although completely empty, and the tracks on the outside have been removed. The tracks on the inside are all still there. So in this build era, all of this equipment is now living in Reading, Pennsylvania. And when I say all the equipment, I mean the passenger equipment itself. The E8As were kept off in Enola, originally Harrisburg for the 4022. It moved to Enola. So for the first time, stuff's starting to come together. Second thing that happened that was kind of big, besides the consolidation of equipment, was the fact that they appointed 2 people, Foxy. So the name Foxy comes up again, and this here is the only picture that I have of Foxy. I think when I asked Foxy if he's got any pictures of himself at work, he says, I have nothing from my railroad days at all. I kept nothing. But this here is Foxy. Foxy was known as the manager of special equipment fleet. They also hired John Evans, who became the general superintendent of the Reading shops. So Foxy talked to us about the fact that he had a great relationship with Stanley Crane, and also with the senior vice president of operations at the time, Richard Hasselman, and said he would go to whatever length was required of him. Other interesting thing about this particular photo is that in the last shots we saw from the early years, we saw blue and black painted office cars. But when it got around time to L. Stanley Crane, who came from the Southern Railway, he did not like Conrail blue, and he did not like the office cars in blue. He could not afford to repaint the entire locomotive fleet to a different color, but he did have the opportunity to repaint his office car fleet at the time. So it was repainted into a completely green scheme, and it was called Conrail Pullman Green. It had its own color. And here, Foxy, like I said, is in Sanborn, as in Fairhope, Ohio, in 1983. Foxy rode just about every single trip that went out. I say just about because if there was 2 different trips, he couldn't be in 2 different places at one time, but he did ride every time that train went out. Foxy was on it. Here, I love this picture from Chip coming around the bend here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You can see the 4022 has yet to receive its gold Conrail lettering. This was out on its very first trip in Conrail Pullman Green. So you can see that trip, the train coming around the corner there. And I get this question a lot, whether I used to get it through my old website, I see it talked about in forums, I see it talked about on all kinds of websites about what color is this train? Is it green or is it black? Is it Brunswick green? Is it Pullman green? Is it black trucks? Is it black underbodies? The answer to the question is straight from the mouth of both Carl Kennedy, who was worked on the equipment later, and from Foxy, who was responsible for getting it all painted. It is green from top to bottom. There is not one piece of painted black on any of that equipment. So the trucks are green, the underbody is green, the roof is green, the bodies themselves are green. So it's one complete coat of green. The only exception to that, of course, would be some of the research cars and the track geometry car, which got a silver roof. That silver was painted on there, and it was called alumilastic. I think I'm saying that right. My new favorite word, alumilastic. Found out about that. That was a special coating to help keep those cars from getting water inside with all of the high-tech equipment that it's stored. So for once and all, we can say for sure that it is definitely green, and it is called Conrail Pullman Green. The other thing that happened after Stanley Crane got to Conrail was the fact that, well, he came from the Southern and he wanted his Southern Railway cars with him. And that's exactly what he got. He ended up buying several Southern Railway office cars for his use, including this one here being switched out at the Reading shops. This is Southern office car number 4, which became Conrail number 4. And interestingly enough, became Norfolk Southern number 4. So it's kept its 4 for quite a while. So many of those Southern Railway cars started showing up, and that was mainly due to L. Stanley Crane coming from the Southern Railway. You might be asking yourself, so why is this chapter of the book called the Build Era? And the answer is quite simple, because they were building lots of different cars. They would strip them down and build them up entirely. That included the theater car, Conrail number 9, which Foxy oversaw the building of. This particular car here is the inside of the track geometry car, looking from the observation room towards the front of the car, which is where the dining room is, way back there in the back. One of the things that L. Stanley Crane said was, okay, great, what's the situation with our geometry cars? And Conrail said, we don't have one. And Stanley Crane was pretty shocked at that, and so had one built. So this particular shot was taken at the Beech Grove shops, the Amtrak Beech Grove shops in Indiana. And you can see here the equipment racks being installed in what was the back of the observation room. You can see some gentlemen kind of right behind the equipment. They're standing in what became the clean room of the car. So sure enough, lots of different changes, all at the hand of Stanley Crane and other Conrail employees at the time. Again, and here is that beautiful Conrail Pullman Green. Even those trucks and underbody equipment there is green. The only differences between this and the business cars is that silver roof. The other thing that was special about the equipment was the 1933, which is coupled right before it. Although important to note, the 1933 was only kind of assigned to the train. The special equipment fleet people would do their best to not let that engine get too far, even if that meant that they would keep it attached to the train overnight with full toilets and not service. They would rather keep that engine with their equipment at all times. So it was kind of assigned unofficially to the equipment itself. Another big thing that happened during this era, of course, is the famous E8As 4020 and 4021 came around. They came to Conrail with their HEP intact, and so they were converted at the Junior locomotive shops. They were painted in this green. As soon as the 4020 came around and the 4021 came around, that meant that the two engines that were the 4022 that was kept at Enola was bumped to Reading. So you could find it at the Reading shops. We have a picture of it living kind of towards the back of the shops in the book. So now they have E8As, and not only do they have E8As, but they have HEP for the first time now as well. And they traded these 4 switchers to Amtrak, and that's how they get those E8As. After the E8As came around, then the car started getting switched over to HEP as well. So you would see that change coming from basically an Amtrak standard over to Conrail. I mean, that's just a small portion of actually what happened during that time. It was a lot. There was a lot going on during that build era. The equipment moves, everything came to Reading. Foxy came around. John Evans came around. They were responsible for the building of a lot of those cars. Some of those cars they built were 9, which was the theater car. They built bedroom car number 8, which was a former Southern Railway coach car. They built the rail analyzer car, which is an impressive feat. And they converted all of that equipment to HEP power. 5 Southern Railway office cars and coaches were purchased in total underneath Stanley Crane. So he definitely brought his influence to the railroad. And they also acquired a large collection of passenger cars during that time as well, including the very famous Dome car number 55. Another thing they did was build a proper geometry train. So now they've got the 22. They converted one of the baggage cars to a storage car, which was Conrail 23. And now they had a proper geometry train underneath Stanley Crane. Swapped out those switchers for their E8As, so now they had good power to pull those engines. The 4022 never had HEP. It had HEP pass-through, but it was never able to generate HEP power for the cars. It kept its steam generators, and to this day still has it, as far as I know. The other important thing that happened towards the end of this era was the fact that Stanley Crane was succeeded by Richard Sanborn, who joined Conrail in 1988 and was CEO for just a month and a half in 1989, and then was replaced after his passing by Jim Hagan. Which takes us to the Altoona years, which was the final years of the train, which was 1991 to 1999. Absolutely love this fantastic photo. You can see all of the equipment during this era in 1999. Everything was moved from Reading to Altoona. The reason is because they were shutting down those shops. So all the shops at Reading had shut down, all the equipment had moved, and for the first time now, all of the equipment lived under one building, and it was this one right here, was Miscellaneous Shop 2, that still stands and houses Norfolk Southern's office car equipment today. So the 4022, the 4021 and 20, all the office cars, including the research cars, could all live under this roof. During this time, there was not as much happened during these last few years as had happened in the prior years, which was the build era. One of the things, though, was the technical services car. So Conrail 20 was a research car that came from the New York Central. It was in pretty rough shape. There's some pretty good stories from the guys that rode that. And it was in pretty rough shape and needed to be replaced. Donald Swanson, who worked for Conrail, I'm sure everybody's heard his nicknames. Donald Swanson used Conrail 2 an awful lot in his career. So this was technically Donald Swanson's car. After Donald Swanson retired, this car was used not nearly as much. So it sat, it kind of tucked off to the side, unused. As soon as Conrail 20 was at the point that it needed to be replaced, they pulled Conrail 2 and converted it to Conrail 19 for the Technical Services Lab. The Technical Services Lab felt pretty spoiled by this because now they have an actual office cars with showers and kitchens and dining rooms. I mean, it was the whole thing. And in addition to that, they also had underbody air conditioning and generators to power the car. So they were pretty spoiled with this. And this is a great shot of the car here that we believe was during its conversion from Conrail 2 to Technical Services Lab 19. The other thing that they did was kind of the second car behind the 1933 here was a former military hospital car, was converted as well for use on this train. Carl Kennedy talked about that particular car, saying that there were other departments that wanted it. So everybody was kind of fighting over who was going to get Conrail 24, which is what that car became. And ultimately, the track geometry train did get that car, Although Carl Kennedy told me that they were also considering converting it into an office car itself. So it was not, did not happen, but it did end up on the track geometry cars. By the way, I think Brock and I did a pretty good job of tracking down histories for just about everything that we wrote about. The only thing that was missing is a lot of information and details about Conrail 24, the military car. We do have suspicions that it was an Amtrak car. It definitely came to Conrail during the Reading years because Steve Sullivan, who worked at Conrail, took photographs of it at the Reading shops. So we know that it was around at the Reading times. It was converted at Altoona, so it had been around for a while. But outside of that, boy, that is a hard. That one has escapes us. So if you know anything about Conrail 24, reach out to us. We'd love to find some more information out.
And I'll say through our research, you know, obviously we started with a lot of Conrail OCS rosters. We found, you know, some minor mistakes and errors on those rosters. So we needed to do a lot of research to make sure that what we presented was absolute fact. The way we put the book together was Wes and I did not combine our research until really close to the very end. So we had a balance and check system to make sure that we both came up with the same type of information. And we did have some differences, and we worked those out by doing even more research. But like Wes said, Car 24 is a mystery still to many, many people. The FRA, the AAR themselves, and the railroads do not have any information on that car. So the information that is presented in the book on Car 24, I 100% believe is the most factual and gathered information anywhere on that car, since they don't have the specifics themselves. So we were happy to kind of figure out that mystery as far as we have. Updates from post book will be published to Wes's website. So, you know, that's something, you know, we'll continue our work on all of this information, and we will post it there, obviously post publishing.
Yep, absolutely. So at the end of that era comes the end of Conrail, unfortunately. A lot of the equipment went off to either CSX or Norfolk Southern, some of it being sent off pretty quickly to private owners. So it just depended on what piece of equipment it was. The E8As, of course, went to Bennett and Eric Levin, who restored those, and those are still extremely famous locomotives. But the book goes into much more depth, including some interior shots and histories and where those cars are now. So we also try to cover off on the special technical research car and where that went, as well as the geometry cars as well. And we also threw in a couple different cars that don't technically fall within this roster, like the Conrail police car that was used for Operation Lifesaver purposes. So we have that information in the book as well. But again, the Altoona years, not a ton happened. I mean, the train was used a lot, but it was not in terms of expanding or buying or selling equipment. That just didn't happen as much during these years. Recapping real quick, all that equipment went from Reading in '91 over to Altoona. I failed to mention this, but Foxy was replaced by Carl Kennedy. And a rather amusing story, if you can, if you have the book and read that, is a great story how that transition happened. Conversion of office car number 2 to test car number 19 happened. Lots of the interiors were updated, so they just would go through, they'd replace some of the interiors, update the upholstery and the curtains and the carpets and things like that. So those kinds of things happen. And then at the end, the cars were all split amongst the different railroads. After we talk about the histories of those different eras, we talk a little bit about the equipment histories themselves. I'm going to go kind of quickly through one of the cars that is my favorite. But the book covers often 4 different engines, 22 different cars, and provides 36 diagrams within the book. So there's lots of good details and nuts and bolts for those that are interested. You can see some pictures here. This is the Conrail 4 spread. Again, some of the dates that we have in here were difficult to track down. And if you look at Conrail documents, you could have a roster from Conrail from 1 year, and it has dates for the equipment. And then a Conrail roster from the next year, or a Conrail document from the next year, has a totally different date. So it just depends. You have to be really careful. And I think Brock and I did pretty good research over the years to try to make sure that it was correct. But you can find inconsistencies. And Conrail 2 was actually, Conrail 4 actually was one of them where it did have some inconsistent dates in there. So we provide the dates. We also provide where those cars ended up. So you can see over there on the right-hand side of the page, you can see Conrail 4, which became NS4. You can see it in a very rarely photographed scheme, which is just Conrail Pullman green with NS4 in gold. All the office cars ended up like that for a while, and then were eventually rebuilt and repainted, of course, since they're new owners. And this particular one, Norfolk Southern 4, was rebuilt entirely to a sleeper car and is no longer an office car. So we go into that level of detail.
And New York Central and Penn Central loves to renumber their office cars very frequently because they liked having them in sequential order. So when you look at the Conrail office car documents, the rosters, sometimes there are mistakes because they say like the car goes from car 9 to 5, and then it goes back to 9 and so forth. What we found out that there were some chronological order issues in those rosters, and we went back to actual New York Central and Penn Central documents to 100% confirm that, you know, some of the Conrail rosters were wrong in the direction of what numbers they went to, and the fact that maybe they didn't go from 4 to 5 to 4, they only went from 4 to 5, or something like that. So we made sure that we were not making assumptions throughout this book, that we really made sure that we looked at the actual factual documents to make sure that everything was correct.
Absolutely, we did, and it was amazing to see. I couldn't believe, and I had always focused a lot on the Conrail years. So when I started to jump into prior years, it was amazing to see the spaghetti mess of how Penn Central numbered their cars. It was unbelievable. But regardless, this is just going to give you a small little taste of the information that's in the book if you don't have it already. I will focus on the car that was my favorite, which was Conrail 1. If I could have had 200 of the pages be just about this car in the book, I would have. Rudy told me to stop it, so I did. So this is office car number 1. It was built in 1920 as Shannon, which was a 12-section one-drawing sleeper car. It was rebuilt in 1941 to a 13-section sleeper for troop train service. And then it was eventually purchased by the Southern Railway in July of 1943 and rebuilt to a dinette coach car. The Hain Car Shop in Spartanburg, South Carolina, rebuilt that car into Southern Railway Office Car 10, as they did with all their other office cars. They were built at Hain Car Shop in February of 1964. And it was renumbered to Southern Railway Office Car number 3 in May of 1970. So what is an office car? We see this sticker here. This sticker is actually a photograph I took of the sticker that was on the window of the office cars. That was the original lettering that Southern Railway put on their cars. Conrail kept that on the glass. And up until the late, I think it was 2013-ish, 2015, when the car was rebuilt, that sticker was still on the car windows, the glass itself. So what is an office car? Well, it was literally a rolling home away from home. Southern Railway used their office cars differently than Conrail did. So Southern Railway actually used them. They were assigned to Conrail executives that would spend most of their days and weeks out traveling on these cars. It would typically be assigned to one executive and a chef and a male secretary. They were out on the road a lot, so that was typically the assignments. The rear observation room in those cars sat over 8 people. It had 2 bedrooms with cherry bureaus and private bathrooms. The dining room sat 8 people, and it had 2 beds that folded down from the dining room to hold even more. The front of the car had the kitchen, electrical cabinets, and the crew rooms. So it literally housed everything you could imagine in your house to a very nice degree. Conrail purchased Conrail 1, which was the former Southern Railway 3. They purchased it on an authorization for expenditure for $100,000 by Stanley Crane, authorized that in 1982. In today's dollars, that would be about $280,000, which is a steal, an absolute steal for a car like that. In today's dollars, $280,000 for those kinds of cars is not much. The Hain Car Shop did an absolutely fantastic job of outlining what happened with these cars. So when Conrail purchased them from Southern Railway, what happened was there was a letter that was sent from Coleman Harvey, which was with the Southern, and he outlined all this really great stuff. And he talked about how often those Southern office cars were run through the Hain Car Shop, which is every 3 to 4 years. They outlined all the stuff that they did, which included removing the glass, replacing the gaskets, stripping everything down, repainting it. But one of the really cool documents that we have actually discusses in detail that handoff. So he was talking about, we'll come down on the week of the February 7th, and we will show the Conrail crews what this car is and how it operates. So pretty cool to be able to have this kind of level of detail in the book. After it was purchased from Conrail, you can see it joined here in what looks like Conrail Pullman green. It was very, very close color, but not quite. So this was still in its Southern Railway office car color before the rest of the fleet was painted blue. So this one, you can see the Southern Railway at the top that would be across the windows has been painted out. And the Southern 3 numbers have been painted out as well. And all you see now is a number 1, which was Conrail 1. This car was never painted blue. It went straight to green. And shortly thereafter, the cars 3 and 2 behind it also were painted green.
I do like that if you look carefully in that photograph, you can see a blue step stool on the end of the car, which is pretty neat.
Very cool. Very cool. Insides of the cars of Conrail 1. Now you have to keep in mind, we're talking about the 80s and the 90s when Conrail was around. It's easy to forget. Everything looks dated, but the reality is this was really nice back in those days. We even know that the interior designer of Conrail 1 was someone named Nancy L. Rogers. We know that the carpet was called turkey red. So we have a good bit of knowledge about these cars now. We know that the draperies were called ivory in color. So, we've got all this super great detail about Conrail 1 and the other office cars. Now, this was in the 90s. This looks very 90s. You wouldn't do this to a car now, but that was very 1990s for the time. Conrail did update this car. Mark Owens was part of a person that helped make sure that these cars were updated during their time. They would use an interior designer as well from Philadelphia. That interior designer would come through and recommend changes to make to the car. So they would recommend the drapes and the vinyl on the walls, the carpets, all that good stuff. Once it was approved by Philadelphia as saying, yep, that's a design we want to go with, Carl Kennedy's crew at the miscellaneous shop, actually went through and did these upgrades themselves. So they actually installed the carpet, they installed the drapes, they did the upholstery. This was not an outside done deal. This was all done by the Conrail team, which was absolutely amazing to hear about. One of my other favorites about this car was that Ron Conway, who was the senior vice president of operations, also loved this car as well. He actually, when the car was split, Ron Conway, and we did get a chance to talk to Ron about this, by the way. So this is word of mouth from Ron himself. But he was talking about the fact that he really wanted to have this car. That was the car that he used to take out all the time. Conrail did not officially assign cars to people, but they were unofficially assigned. So you hear an awful lot, like Hasselman's car was 10 or Swanson's car was 2. In this case, this was the car that Ron Conway used all the time. He tried really hard to get this car over from Norfolk Southern, make sure that it went with him to CSX. Norfolk Southern at the time said, no. We're getting the cars that had Southern history. We'll take this one. And despite his best efforts, Ron Conway did lose the car to Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern, like I showed you before on Conrail 4, this is a picture of Conrail 5, where you can see they just took all the Conrail logos off and put on the NS5. Reminds me an awful lot of what Conrail did back when they first bought the car in '82. It's a very similar look where all they're doing is taking all the logos off and putting on the new numbers. So it kind of ended up the same way that it got to Conrail. Eventually, of course, it was painted into Norfolk Southern paint. Not much was done. So pretty much the interior of the car stayed exactly the same as it did on Conrail days, including the green carpets. All the way up to the end. You can see a picture of it here. The only thing that was really changed was they had white wallpaper. Eventually, in the, I think it was 2016, I don't remember for sure off the top of my head, it was completely rebuilt again. So everything that you saw in this particular picture is completely gone. Those walls are gone, the windows are gone. I think the only thing that's left there would just simply be the end windows on the observation platform. And it became this. So this is now Norfolk Southern Maryland 5, rebuilt as an observation car for them. You can see the interior is completely modernized, no longer bears any resemblance to its Southern Railway history. These seats are theater style seats. They're large leather seats. And they are on removable platforms. So the platforms can be removed, as can these seats. And when they do, it would look something like this. Those blue seats are where the swivel seats are. So that is that's the configuration when it was with just standard seating. And you can see a small dining room here. And behind that are some bedrooms in the car. So completely rebuilt. And we try to cover off on all that history. Of course, no good railroad book would be complete without excellent diagrams. So we do have diagrams that show the interiors of the cars. I think this one on top is extremely popular. You can probably find that. Well, it's on my website. You can find those kind of anywhere, but the ones underneath it are a little more rare, and those talk about what all the underbody boxes are, and both of those diagrams are in the book for the equipment that we could find them for. That's a lot of talk about steel, but we have to remember that this steel came to life because of those people. I think someone said in the comments, he said it really well. It did. It came to life because of the people that wrote it, and the people that we got to talk to from this book showed us all the different ways that it came to life. Talking to people that worked on Conrail 20 and the transition from 20 to 19. And some of the inventions that they came up with. Brock, do you want to talk about some of those things? I can't remember what they came up with, the hotbox equipment stuff, correct? I believe was.
Yeah, one of the innovations that Conrail came up with was a hotbox simulator. So they wanted to come up with a way to simulate a hotbox while they were en route to make sure that the detectors were working correctly. And that was actually, the work was patented by Conrail. Still held today by those who worked on the project. But that's just one of the many experiments and problems that they worked on. I will say one of the things that I did not expect when I first came up with a vision for this book 15, 16 years ago was including so much about the track measurements, the geometry team, and the laboratory team. But it became very clear as we started to have conversations with them and starting to dig into the information about the cars that no one had ever really talked to them. Their stories have never been told. The work that they did has never really been out in the public. And it very much deserves to be, because they helped Conrail continue to move from that railroad that was losing $1 million a day to the innovator in railroad industry, moving forward with so many different things. They tested the conductivity of ballast. I mean, just the amazing things that they worked on that never got the notoriety. And it's one of the things that I'm most proud of in this book, that we get to tell their story about what they did to help Conrail become better. And, the people became a very big part of this book. This book has something for everyone. If you're a modeler, you want the details, you're a rivet counter, you want all that stuff. From like a page 156 on through the book, you get every single engine and car one by one and all that information. But the very beginning, as Wes laid it out, it's a chronological order, the story of how the trains were used, why, and then all those stories, the hours and hours of recorded interviews that we did. But this group here, the track measurement group, the laboratory group, helping to even solve crimes with people stealing copper, all that information is provided here. We have sidebars on fuel efficiency testing, train lubrication testing that they used Car 24. Just some fascinating information to see the depths that people were working behind the scenes, and I'm really honored to be able to present their work in this book.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill Gentleman is the second from the right here. Bill Gentleman provided lots of information on and photographs of his time. Larry Myers also provided information on the technical services lab and the work that Brock was describing there. In talking to him, when I wrote it out how I thought best described the technical services lab, and he said, well, yeah, close, but let me do this. So like so we have people that we know, we feel pretty confident about the validity and the accuracy of the information because it came straight from their mouth. And that was the cool part of this, where you're talking about their stories. It wasn't me writing a story about Conrail 20 necessarily. It was about what they did with the car that made it so special. Same thing with our track geometry people as well. In this particular case, this is Conrail 2022, the rail analyzer car. So we got people sitting in there. This is the crew from, that was the hard thing to nail down. And one of the things that when we talked to people, everybody said, this was the last strip of this train. This is the last time this equipment was used. And that is hard to put in a book as the last, because everybody has a last, right? It was the last between Columbus and, whatever. And so it was a difficult thing to actually put down what the last strip of the book was. All I will tell you is this particular shot, Carl Kennedy is off to the very far left here. He was in charge of the cars, just like Foxy was. He was in charge of the equipment. This is Jim Smith. Jim Smith was in charge of all of the car attendants and chefs on the train. This picture was taken by Mike Gilday on 5/19 of 99, pretty darn close to the end of Conrail. So we're pretty certain that this was pretty close to the last train, if not the last train, but can't say for certain. The other sad thing that Brock was talking at the beginning of the Historical Society is all these people on this platform, the only person that is around today that we are aware of is Carl Kennedy. Everybody else has passed and has moved on. Brock and I wish that we could have spent 20 more hours just talking to the porters and the car attendants, but unfortunately, from our research, many, if not all of the people on that platform have passed. So it was a good time to write this book.
And that drives home my point to the beginning of this meeting. Those oral histories are so important because that information is gone. There were still probably 2 or 3 people that we would have loved to have talked to other than the attendants. working on this book, but we kind of circumvented and got the information that we needed. But I would have loved to have talked to some of those guys. Many of them were retired Pullman attendants, back at that time, 30 years ago. So by now they really would have been ancient. But the service that they gave that train and the people that rode that train was absolutely second to none.
Yeah. And Doug Watts, I mean, he's a member of the Historical Society, and I'm so glad to have met him and talked to him and captured his story in here as well. So you can see, we've got stories from everybody that worked on this equipment, and it's been an absolute honor to do this book and to write it. Talking to Ron Conway, I think he said it really well. He said, Richard Hasselman was critical in the train's transformation and success. To quote him directly, he said, Dick was very involved with the train, making sure that the changes to the cars matched what he wanted. Mr. Crane was the guy that got it all started. Mr. Hasselman was the guy that kept it going. And Ron Conway was the guy that got to use it. So really great stuff. We do have train highlights as well. So we try to cover as much stuff as we could that wasn't Pennsylvania. I know that a lot of our members are in Pennsylvania, but not everybody wants to see pictures taken in Harrisburg. So we did our best to try to go outside of Pennsylvania as much as possible. And we've done that with some train highlights like the Spirit of Massachusetts, the Michigan Sesquicentennial, the Michigan Mercury, and the Ohio, the Heart of It All specials, where people that rode those trains actually got a chance to tell us exactly what the train was all about. So again, another example of people telling their stories, and it wasn't just about the equipment. Technical services people, track measurement people as well. So really at the end of the book, what this came down to was this started off as me writing websites and Brock collecting and writing down histories. And it turned into a story about people way much more than I ever thought. And these are just a few of the contributors that we have, people like Chip and Larry and Doug and Jim Hagan and Ron Conway, Foxy and Carl Kennedy. There's just, the list goes on and on of people. This is just some of them that we got to talk to. So I'm deeply honored to have met each of them. And it kind of ends where it begins, where this was the story of them. And I'm really happy that I got to tell it. I'm really happy I got to meet the people that I did. And I'm happy that I got to see Brock's collection of stuff, because it's a lot. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it. I'm sure you've heard an awful lot about this book as we've been trying to promote it, but I hope that each of you will pick up a copy if you haven't already. But thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No, I see some people asking questions about stories and so forth. We have stories from it's the bottom all the way up. So you've got the stories from the CEO, VP of Transportation, VP of Operations. You have people that were in charge of the train from the managerial side, but also the business side, the people that put the trips together, that were in charge of putting these office car or inspection or marketing trips together. And then down to the people that used it, the departments that used it, and then also directly to the people that were operating the train. So you have road foreman, conductor, engineer, because people were handpicked to use the equipment. It had a different, the E8s had a different brake type on that not everyone was used to. So there's all kinds of stories like that. There's stories that will make you laugh. There's stories that you will read and you'll have to reread again because you'll be like, no, that never happened. There's no way. Strapping explosives to the geometry car and detonating them. Well, we heard it from more than one person, and then we found the photographs of it. Stories about helicopters flying things in for the train that were needed, changing all the toilets at a quick stop. All kinds of crazy stories, documented, made sure factual. And so you've got top to bottom, all kinds of amazing information. And to me, that's what my dream for this book always was, to get the information from the people themselves, give the personality of the train, how they were used, because that's even more important of that's what pushed the legacy of Conrail. The use of this for inspection, for marketing, Stanley Crane coming in and saying, well, where's our geometry car? Oh, we don't have a geometry car. Well, let's fix that right away. So I'm incredibly thankful to work with Wes. There's nobody I could have done this with any better. It's 416 pages. It's almost an inch and a half. It's 4 pounds each. If you haven't reserved one, do so now because they are flying off the shelf. You can do that at cr-ocs.com, cr-ocs.com, or just look up Garbely Publishing. You can find it there, but they're moving fast.
And well, most importantly, let's say this too, Brock. We took nothing for it. So all the proceeds for the book are going back to us, the Historical Society. So Brock and I donated all the profits to the book to the society itself. So that's another thing too. You're helping the society when you buy the book.
Yeah, our royalties are completely donated to the society, and that was my wish from the beginning as well, 15 years ago. Because it's a labor of love. It is our certainly our life legacy. Wes and my name will be linked together forever, and we're honored that we were able to tell the stories of the employees and that Conrail legacy. And the book is dedicated to those employees of Conrail for their ingenuity, sacrifice, and determination to make Conrail what it eventually became. So thank you so much. Honestly, if you do have a copy and you want to get it signed, we'll certainly be at events in the future. We do have 2 book signings coming up next Saturday, one in the morning midday at Brian's Model Trains in Myerstown, and then in the afternoon at Cupboard Maker Books, which is literally right across from the Enola train yard. So you can join us at those 2 locations next Saturday. But thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to present this. And we hope that you enjoy the book, and we're really looking forward to getting feedback from people after they get a chance to go through the book, because there's really something in there for everyone. And it kind of changes by section of the book and what you're dealing with and what you're looking for. So thank you very much. So at this point, we will get ready with Jeremy Plant and his wonderful photography of Conrail in central Pennsylvania. I've known Jeremy and his son Brian for a long time, and I'm lucky that I get to see a lot of Jeremy's work on social media and so forth, and he's been promoting a lot of Conrail lately. So I'm excited to be able to see his presentation here.
Hang on, Rudy's gonna try to go up and see if he can figure out what's going on. Jeremy, you are off mute. Can you hear what's going on here?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sure
we
can.
Okay, what do? I've got the PowerPoint in front of me with presenter view.
At the bottom of your screen, you should see a little green icon that says screen share. If you roll your mouse down.
Okay. Let me see. Share sound.
Yes, if you want, if you have sound, you can.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to narrate it.
Okay, then you don't need the sound.
Okay. And now do I hit the share?
Yes, correct. There we go.
Okay,
Alright.
is that, am I ready to go now or?
In the upper, just above your mouse there, I believe it says use slide view.
Yeah,
Yep, click on that. There you
okay,
go.
okay. And I can begin talking?
Yep, we're all ready. Go right ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. It's certainly a privilege to be here. And I've just had a wonderful, lesson in the office car train, which I have photographed now and then, but never really knew that much about. What I have for the society today is a collection of pictures ranging from Berks County in the east to South Fork on the west, and my definition of central Pennsylvania, including the Buffalo line as far as Northumberland. Just a little background, we moved up here from Northern Virginia in 1988. There were several advantages in our view of moving up here: less traffic, a cheaper cost of living, and for me, being a mile away from the Conrail main line. And so very few sunny Saturdays and Sundays went by in this 10-year period that we're going to be looking at without dabbling a little bit in the various locations and operations of Conrail. So with no further ado, let's get started with an ore train heading west at Walnut Town near Fleetwood in Pennsylvania. We're going to be moving west from here to Harrisburg and Rockville, and then up the Buffalo line, back to Enola, and then as far west to South Fork. So here's an ore train. For some reason, I'm not in the presenter view here, so I don't have the information on the date. I believe it's 1994 and October, judging from the foliage. Here's an ALHB coming near Blandon. Nice collection of power. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that 3004, I believe, went to Guilford and was one of the original New York Central GP40s. Here's a light power move at Blandon coming down the cutoff. A brand new LMS, but one of the ones that's lettered for Conrail. Here's a westbound to Temple, kind of raggedy looking SD40-2, and a much better looking C40-9 or -8, -9. Okay. Down at Beltline Junction in Reading, here's the ALPI heading down into downtown Reading with the 6845, a SD60 on the lead. Here's an eastbound. I don't have the symbol of this, unfortunately, but it's obviously got some CSX power in there as well. These were taken in July of '94. Moving west, here's the station at Palmyra, and this is TV 233, and again another SD60 on the lead. Handsome engines. This is the fall of 91. Looking the other way, milepost 96 here, the station, the old Reading station on the right. Here's the loaded coal train heading east. This is in 1991. A cold winter day, kind of fitting for a Sioux Line set of power heading east. Again, this is in the winter of 1991. A little bit west of Palmyra, there's a nice overpass on the boundary road between Derry Township and Palmyra. Here's this is Mail 3 heading west. Again, a fall scene. Fall was always my favorite time to take pictures, and you'll see quite a few shots here taken in the autumn months. There was a flood or something that affected CSX operations in 1992, I believe, or 96, excuse me. Anyway, this is Detour 136 heading east on the east side of Hershey. Here's a scene that looks quite different today. The signals have been replaced by a signal bridge. Factory is gone, and this is an eastbound, roaring through Hershey with the famous, of course, Derry Road crossing, a little bit out of view to the about the 5th or 6th car up there. You're going to see a little bit of an overrepresentation of some of my favorite engines. So one of which is the C-39. The so-called camels or whatever. This is from a location just a little bit east of the Derry Road crossing in Hershey. This was a favorite place to go in the long days of May and June. The light would be perfect for eastbounds. And I believe this is an ENMO, which was one of the fairly predictable early to mid-morning trains in those days, eastbound. Another ENMO, another one of my favorite types of engines, the B40s, with of course their logo on the front there of the labor and management. For those who have worked on the railroad, including my son, the happy relationship of labor and management is sometimes a little bit more strained than the folks might like to say, but anyway, there's a couple of nice B40s here heading through Hershey. Obviously a very common location for shooting, but a very, very good one. And again, this is before the signal bridge changed the look of the place. Triple Crown, oftentimes with a single unit, again, heading through Hershey, eastbound in the morning. And this would be in, I believe, in 1994. I talked about overrepresentation. I had a real love of these ore trains, these little trains of short ore jennies that were quite common in the mid-90s. I think they were closing out some operations in the steel mills. Some were closing and some were moving ore from one place to another, but quite a common sight. Again, this is eastbound coming through Hershey. And here's another eastbound. These are some other interesting engines, C-37-A's. The only company that originally bought that was Conrail, as was the case with the C-39s, along with the with NS for the C-39s. Kind of a rare treat in those days, less common than it's become, was getting what we called foreign power or run-through power. And here's a couple of very clean Southern Pacific units trailing. And for those of you that know the Southern Pacific, getting a clean unit on the Southern Pacific and most times was a very rare event indeed. And again, you can see the Hershey shifter up there with an end-cam switcher. Almost got in the way of this, but decided to wait a little bit before the train passed. This is probably my favorite picture in the entire collection here for a variety of reasons. I spent so much good time down at Dairy Road. And I love the idea of getting orders hooked up. And this time I timed it almost perfectly. And some of you may know who that engineer is. He's taking a drag on a cigarette at the same time he's picking up the orders. And the 6019, again, one of my favorite types of engines. Another shot of orders getting picked up by the traveling operator at Dairy Road. A couple of fairly brand new GE units. I've been amazed putting this collection together at how good those engines looked when they were new, and how pretty the blue still seems compared to what we have today there. And this seemed like a more reasonable way to hoop up the orders than trying to lean out of that very high cab window, as was the case in the other two shots. This was kind of an unusual move. For some reason, the 6137 was just sitting around the Dairy Road area, the yard there, the Hershey yard, and the 8939 connected up with it. It's obviously not running, otherwise it would have been, the most powerful Hershey shifter in history. I'm not quite sure what the operation was supposed to be doing there, but at that time, the 8939 was the regular assigned unit at Hershey, as was this rather somber looking caboose. I believe that's ex-New Haven. Someone can correct me in the chat later if I'm wrong. And of course, the Hershey shifter, because it, backed up down to the new factory or West factory, required the use of a caboose well into the 90s and even into the 2000s. Another favorite shot, and I was primed for this after hearing about the office car trains eastbound coming through Hershey. Nothing ever looked prettier than that, I think. And here it is going away with Conrail 10 at the rear. And I was trying to make out what that sign at the rear was, but someone, maybe either Brock or Wes, can tell me what that's is indicating. Another time, another close call with the Hershey shifter who backed up the tank cars, about 30 seconds after the train came through. It was always a little bit fascinating here. You can see that those trucks are green. Another favorite of mine, and again, will be overrepresented in the show, is the SD80 Max that came along in '96. This is fairly soon after their introduction. And, again, the shot at Hershey, various different ways to do it, different lengths of lenses and so forth, but it was always good for a morning eastbound for lighting. And these always seem to go in pairs, which made it nice too, to see a matched pair together. Downtown Hershey, again, this has changed a good deal. This is mail 3 coming through, westbound. I always like the circus trains. I took my and other animals down the street in Hershey. It's sad to think this is all gone now, but here it is at the yard there, the little yard in Hershey, the east side of Hershey, excuse me. And here it is in downtown with some of the animals being unloaded. These are in May of '97, these 2 shots. And I think this is the last actual Conrail train I got. This was on June 1st, 1999. And it was a surprise. We didn't think there were going to be any movements that day, but we got both the circus train and a westbound. And this later went down the Lurgan line. Again, I can't recall the symbol of it, but it certainly was a pleasant surprise and made for an interesting picture of the 2 together. And here's part of the train in 1990 coming east, pretty much at the near CP Brownstone. And for those of you who know Hershey, it doesn't look much like that anymore. It looks like this is out in the middle of the country, but it's been pretty well developed around there since. The trains would, circus trains would generally go down to Harrisburg, the residential part for the crew and the circus employees, and then would come back to Hershey from Harrisburg. So this is an eastbound move. And again, in 1990, here's the train from the Millard's Quarry heading over to Rockville and Enola. And that's a C-36-7, I believe, on the lead, and a U-23, right? Yeah, U-23B. And I was telling Brock before the show, it's amazing to look back and see how brilliant the colors were for Conrail equipment back in the early 90s. Here's a beautiful looking 6720 ENMO. This is on October 24th, 1990. And October 30th, 1990, same location. Here's an interesting set of power. That's an actual SD40, not an SD40-2. Another U-23B and a GP10 on a coal train, or I guess it's actually a mixed freight. Looks like it's got a slug of hopper cars there on the lead. Another overrepresented type here is going to be the C-32s, painted for Ballast Express, or a couple of cases later on, you'll see still in Conrail blue. This is actually in the service it was painted for, a ballast train coming over from Millard's to Enola. This is at Brownstone or Hummelstown, Pennsylvania. Another ore train coming through Hummelstown. This was my closest place to get to from where I lived in Hershey. So if I knew something was coming and I was running out of time, I could make a quick dash down to Hummelstown and usually get a fairly decent eastbound shot there. On the other side of Hummelstown, here's a B-23-7 on the lead. There's actually a couple of them there. coming upgrade from Rutherford up into Hummelstown. Continuing west, this is at near CP Terra, a little bit east of Rutherford Yard, eastbound coal train. This is in 1994. This brings back a lot of memories. Before any of these pictures were taken, I was stationed in the Army at Indiantown Gap in 1970, 71, and I used to go down to Rutherford Yard a lot back when it was Reading in Western Maryland, when everything seemed to be really busy down there by the coaling tower, and it seemed like a kind of a permanent thing. It's like a monumental structure. But in late 1994 and early 1995, it met its end. And this is before, and there's an after. It was a sad end to a beautiful bit of railroadiana there. This is in January of 95. Another pretty clean unit, and in a location that's now pretty well treed in. You can't get a shot quite like this anymore. This is at CP Ruth, and heading west with empty hoppers. This is in the fall of 1989, so one of the older pictures in the collection here. Kind of didn't exactly know where to put this because this is the only picture that I had of the Amtrak line east of Harrisburg. This is at Reams, between Lancaster and Elizabeth town. And this is a westbound OCS. An interesting train in the early 90s was train ENRO that was Enola to Roanoke. And it almost always had NS power, but because NS in their wisdom did not equip their engines with toilet facilities, it always had a Conrail leader for the benefit of the crew. Here it is at downtown Harrisburg going up the loop at CP Capitol to get onto the Lurgan line and head south to Hagerstown and Roanoke. Flipping to the other side of the river, here's a coal train heading down from Enola down to York Haven. And this is, again, one of the earliest ones in the book. This is from the summer of 1988. Over on the west side, again, west shore of the Harrisburg area, again, this is the local over to Shiremanstown from Enola in the early months of 1989. And some might like that Erie Lackawanna boxcar there too, or a gondola car, excuse me. Again, over on the west shore, here's another ENRO. So this is in March of 91, B-23 on the lead, and a good slug of NS power. This was one of those trains that went around the loop, you know, in Harrisburg, would head west to the bridge from Enola, over the bridge, through Harrisburg, over the Reading Bridge, and then south on the Lurgan. Pardon my scratchy voice here. Moving now to the west side of Harrisburg. This is another location that's pretty commonly shot. Excuse me, the Route 39 bridge, or Lingelstown Road Bridge. And this is another LMS, this one lettered for LMS. Early morning eastbound train. Over at Rockville, here's another one of the original SD40s. leading a westbound train around where the tower used to be. And from here, we're going to, switch directions a little bit and head up the Buffalo line. This was another one of our favorite trains to shoot. This is ENBU that would leave Enola usually about 10 o'clock in the morning. Head over the bridge and head up the Buffalo line. This is in the fall of 1990. A couple of pretty clean looking wide cabs coming around through Rockville with the ENBU. July 4th, 1991. This was a very photographed train with some interesting power. And again, the question, why couldn't that FP45 be put on the lead? But it was not to happen. Another thing I liked about Conrail in those days was the signal bridges. And here's a classic one, a little bit past Y on the Buffalo line, between Y and Duncannon, a northbound or westbound hopper train. This is at South Ferry. Oh, this is BUEN coming down. That oftentimes had a very coming down the Buffalo line. And I'm getting messages here occasionally that my internet connection is unstable. I hope my voice is coming through. I have no way of knowing really. But anyway, here's one of the C-32s still in the blue. And this would be in the early months of 1990. Another C-32, this is at Dalmatia on the Buffalo line, BUEN, or ENBU, excuse me, heading north. The Fisher's Ferry. Looking at this, I was remarking to my son, pretty light power for a loaded coal train, but no heavy grades between probably where it probably came out of Clearfield and was able to kind of follow rivers all the way down to Enola. So loaded coal train on the Buffalo line. Here's the local over to Shamokin Dam and Selinsgrove coming across the Susquehanna at Selinsgrove Junction. Kind of a ancient bridge there, and interesting that that line is still in operation, I believe. Another shot that everyone pretty and what could a show be on the Buffalo line?
think his connection just gave up the ghost officially, so we'll see if we can get him reconnected here.
Yeah, I was just coming upstairs to look at that. He's gone entirely. So
Yep, he just popped back on here, so he's getting
How
back
long have I
on.
been off?
Just
we go.
maybe 20, 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. I didn't, it's hard for me to tell. I'm just kind of by myself here.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so again, this is a BUEN coming into Enola. And these rock trains occasionally would get some really bizarre power. This was, perhaps the most bizarre I think that I saw, with a NCAB switcher 9424 leading. This was also interesting because there was some kind of amazing radio chatter between the engineer of this train and the Harrisburg terminal operator. I think they would have been in a fist fight, if they hadn't been separated and were in physical proximity. This train was told to go up to CPY and then come back down after waiting for about 20, 30 minutes, and the crew was not real happy about it, but it's an interesting collection of power. Here's a PIBA coming in to Enola shot from the old Iron Bridge in the fall of 1990. Same day, I believe. This is coming in from the west with the loaded coal train. Good color. Nothing like fall colors, right? Can't beat it for pictures. Here's one of the ex-Reading SW1001s leading a power transfer over from Harrisburg Yard. This was a pretty common kind of move, but the uncommon collection of power that day. And these guys didn't get to our part of Pennsylvania too often. These are two ex-Erie-Lackawanna ST40-2s. They tended to stay at Altoona or a little bit west of Altoona on the South Fork branch and so forth, and would oftentimes find themselves pushing on the back end of trains on the west slope. So it was kind of a treat to get them coming in. This is a ALEN, I believe. That's the symbol on that. And again, SD80 Max, some of my favorites. This was right after they were delivered in the summer of '96, coming into Enola from the famous Iron Bridge. Another transfer from over from Harrisburg to Enola. GP10s, and I guess it looks like another one of those SW1001s. This would be in the summer of '89. So it's quite a good place if you like Jeeps. They seem to hang out a lot at Enola. Here's a couple of variations there. One with '38 and a SW1500, smoking it up. Okay, I got to note that the connection wasn't good. We're having a cold, windy day here, so maybe affecting the internet a little bit. Westbound, leaving Enola. And here's a couple of the workhorse U-23Cs that were assigned by Conrail, XPC units for heavy switching duties. Here's a couple, and I put this in because the 6908 is in a remarkably clean shape. And you can see that most of them had that kind of grimy look of the 6907 and of the pair. And these, I think, left the roster were 93, 94, somewhere in that range. So it was nice to get them while they were still working. Another BUEN coming over the Rockville Bridge, about to cross into Enola. A couple of the C-37As on the lead. These were initially supposed to be working the Boston-Albany lines, but they did show up occasionally in central Pennsylvania. Mail 3 coming over the bridge, heading west. Here's one of the earliest shots in the book. This is from January of 1989. The second unit there probably would be of interest to some people, a somewhat rare Conrail painted GP30 and a fairly new SD 50 there on the lead. This is at Marysville. And if you look very closely, you can see a light engine movement on the Rockville Bridge in the background. This is at Perdix, a little bit west of Banks Tower, westbound. And this was a little bit unusual too, to actually see the GP10s out on the road. They were usually assigned to transfer and switching duties at Enola, but for whatever reason, they got 3 of them together on this empty hopper train. This was in the late fall of 1989. This is nearing Cove, a little bit between Banks and Cove. And here's a shot at Cove, Mail 3, the 6004, and you can see the river there, the Susquehanna in the background. Always a great place to hang out with other rail fans. Usually find somebody at Cove, and there'd always be a lot of trains, and generally good place to have a good time. Including here, this is probably the best location at Cove of all, with the signal bridge, now unhappily retired, and a couple of the SD80 Max heading west. A little bit west of there, a different way of shooting the signal bridge, and a good way to get the kind of the position lights indicators in clear view. This is a westbound hopper train, and the dependable pair of SD40-2s that were still quite common. This was in the fall of 1991. Again, in the Cove area, we have a B-23-7 on the lead, and one of the early slugs that Conrail put together. Here's a junior rail fan, now a senior rail fan. This is my son, Brian. Excuse me. Across the street from what was then our favorite eating place, the Duncannon Diner, or Decoven Diner, excuse me. And this was when the wide cabs were pretty much an exciting thing to see, and he really wanted to experience one, so the train was stopped there. This is a excuse me. Haven't talked this much in years. So anyway, Brian was invited up there. I started to go up with him. I mean, he was only 9 years old, and the engineer said, "Not you." So he got to go up and I didn't, and got to take a look at a wide cab C40-8W. And here's a meet. That's the train. That's the 6087 that he got up in, waiting there on the third track to get into Enola, and getting passed by another eastbound. And finally on their way. Let's let that sit for a minute and get a glass of water. Another favorite location is, of course, the Sherman's Creek Bridge at Duncannon. And tell me if I'm wrong. You can see, if you look carefully right here, that appears to be an eagle. It looks like it has a white head. And we know that there are bald eagles in that part of the Susquehanna, Juniata river valleys. And the high and wide train coming over last light. It's kind of beautiful to see the colors that come out in last light on the Pensy stone arch bridges like this. This was one of the last Conrail trains we got. This is May 30th, 1999. We were almost going to pack it in, and we got this train at Millerstown and chased it and got to the rather perilous place to shoot on the bridge over the Juniata on 11:15, which is not for the faint of heart, but if you know the train is going to be close, it can work out nicely. So this is a eastbound train coming through with one of the 2500s, the SD70s. On the weekends, the mail trains would oftentimes get a really big slug of power. And this was Sunday, October 30th of 1991. And this is at Bailey's. Another nice signal bridge, milepost 128. Another shot from May of '99 that we wanted to get. This was between Bailey's and Newport, and you could kind of shoot across the river here and get a westbound. And again, getting toward the end of Conrail, and not really anticipating the transition to NS, but we knew it was going to happen. Not too far from where that other shot was taken. This is at the big sweeping curve that the river makes and the railroad follows coming into Newport. Again, a ballast express, but not exactly doing what the ballast express was supposed to be designed for, hauling a westbound trailer train, or triple crown train, excuse me. Another shot of an office car special. This is coming around the curve, looking the other way, basically from where that shot was taken at Newport. And this was always a good fall place because some of those maple trees along the river there would really turn brilliant yellow and be a nice contrast to colors of the train. Just a bit west of there, coming by the township offices there in Newport. This is eastbound train with a couple of my favorite Macs. So I apologize, but not really, for overloading the show here with SD80 shots. Here's another one. A Mennonite couple parked down there taking in the scenes as this train, I think it's a PIBA, if I'm not, no. So this is from the Route 17 bridge. Again, a very common place for people to shoot, but a very good location and well lit pretty much all day long because it's going north-south here. Thompson Town. Westbound. Other westbound. You can see the angle is different between the old bridge and the new bridge. This is from the old bridge. It was much closer to the signals. And the other was from the newer bridge that's in place now on Route 333. Here's a one-of-a-kind engine, the 6726. It had that lettering and paint for the Olympic bike trials in Altoona. So it struck me as a somewhat unusual event to commemorate in such a splashy way on an engine, but 1992, this was a little bit after that in the fall of 92. Again, moving west, let me check my time here. This is at Mexico, loaded coal train. And again, another ballast express. This is Mail 3, heading west at Mexico. Wonderful place to shoot, great place to hang out. The winter months, you know, the light was very well positioned for the shot at Mexico in the winter. And always looked like it would be coming out of a tunnel, but it actually, of course, just skirted that big ridge there on its way west. Next town from there would be Port Royal. And this is on May 29th, 1999. Again, part of our effort to document Conrail as much as possible before NS came in. And again, we were fortunate getting SD80s. This is Amtrak coming through Port Royal. This is in August of 97. Heading east at Port Royal. And May 30th, 1999, this is ALPI. And again, we waited out. This was in March of 94, I believe. This is at Lewistown, heading west. It's at Mays, crossing over the Juniata. Jack's Narrows. This is in May of 99. Again, you know, not too long before the takeover by NS, and already beginning to see the renumbering of the units. Not quite sure what the ouch is for. Mapleton, westbound road railer. At Mapleton. And looking the other direction, here's an eastbound coming through Mapleton. Another place that I've shot over the years that I like is the grade crossing a little bit west of Mill Creek. Gives you a nice westbound shot, and you can see the big quarry operation there in the background. This is that coming into Huntington, Mail 3. Another pretty common location for shots, but a really good overhead view from the road of westbound trains. Spruce Creek, Bay 14th, 99, westbound. A little bit west of the tunnel, there's a loaded coal train that same day, Spruce Creek. Tyrone Forge, westbound. This was in February of 98. And again, that same picture, which I think you were able to see at Lewistown Junction, we chased the train. It was kind of an interesting story. We didn't know this train was coming, and we were eating lunch at the DeKoven Diner. We saw it go by, and somehow I still don't know how many laws I broke, but we were able to pay for our meal, get in the car, beat it to Lewistown, and then beat it again to Tyrone. Certainly worth it. Here's an ore train coming into Altoona. This was in October 20th, 1991. Brian and I and Paul Withers took a trip out to the Altoona area and had just tremendous luck. And many of the pictures from here on till the end are actually going to be taken on that same day. So here's the train coming into Altoona, and you can see a pretty good batch of engines there on either the deadline or somehow waiting servicing. Here's a train on the Hollidaysburg branch, out downtown Altoona, same day, October 20th, 91, GP15. And we chased that ore train west. Here he is coming up by this sandbank there at on the west side of Altoona. Beautiful fall colors that day. And here's the pushers, obviously a very heavy train. So we got the double set of pushers. You can really see the grade there too, beginning. Pretty much the same location. Westbound train, 3 GEs. Back when there were 2 tunnels still, here's one coming out of the tunnel at Gallitzin. This was in 1990, or 91, excuse me, 91. And construction underway at milepost 248 to basically eliminate the tunnel that this guy's coming through in favor of the new expanded tunnel. AR Tower, again, October 20th, 91. Pushers on a eastbound coal train. Mail 3, west of Gallitzin. Same day. And up at Crescent, MO Tower was still in existence then. And here we have westbound a couple of engines coming off the branch to the left, and a couple of pushers over to the right of the train. South Fork, westbound train, and some westbound pushers, eastbound pushers, I mean, with the kind of interesting architecture there of the town of South Fork in the background. So we've reached the kind of the western end of what I consider to be central Pennsylvania. But I had to finish off in with a special way, and that is there's still Conrail out there. So here's in April of 2014. Here's the 89. My rambling talk here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Always appreciate your work, and always great to see the Middle Division heavily represented in all of that. So your work, along with your son, speaks volumes. Always top of the pile. So thank you for your time putting that together and your time today presenting it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Brought back some great memories.
It's certainly pieces of my childhood, snapshot by snapshot. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Alex Lang is going to be our final presenter with a bit of nerdology as it relates to symbols. This is a part 2 of something that we had started earlier. So I will let Alex get ready and go ahead and present. Somebody who I've known now for probably, my goodness, almost 25 years after meeting at college. And we want to congratulate Alex for his new position. And he can talk a little bit about that, but congratulations to him on his recent job change. So have at it, Alex.
All right. Let me know if there's any audio issues, please. I'm rocking 2 computers this afternoon. So good afternoon. I'm following in some giant footsteps with Jeremy Plant's wonderful photography and Brock and Wes's lifetime of accomplishments. And instead, I think we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction. But yeah, really, really appreciate the awesome presentations you guys did this afternoon. I grew up in Allentown area and was in college at Lebanon Valley in the late 90s in Annville, Pennsylvania. So I probably saw a couple of the same trains as Jeremy Plant's photos there today. And my pictures aren't nearly as good. So anyway, that all wonderful stuff. So today we're going to talk a little bit in the abstract as far as the intersection of model railroading and the prototype. So I'm starting a model railroad. I've been starting it for probably about 8 years in my family room in my basement. We'll get to some pictures, but first I wanted to talk about where I'm trying to replicate. It's the modeling year is 1994, and the area I'm modeling is really only a few scale miles. The former Lehigh Valley Railroad main line in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, right around CP Bethlehem, the east end of Allentown Yard, former CNJ, Central New Jersey track, and then crossing the Diamond at CP Bethlehem, it was the Reading Company, all pre-Conrail. And so even into the mid-90s, it was a fascinating place to watch the action. Bethlehem Steel was still running, but definitely about in its decline, with the blast furnaces shutting down in 94, maybe 95, and the coke works shutting down, I want to say 1997. Let's see. So connecting this to the prototype, and one of the reasons that I wanted to kind of have this chat with you all today is the interesting aspects of doing the research on prototype documents. So, you know, here we have the timetable sections from that era in Conrail. These will be included in a miniature paper timetable that when you come to run trains on my layout, you'll get a timetable. Dave Abelese does the same thing on his Onondaga cutoff layout, which you'll see I'm representing today. These are probably old scans I did on my own, but these days you can just go find these for yourselves on multimodalways.org's website. So one of the things that's worth mentioning before we get into the nerdology aspect is, you know, why did I pick this area? Well, like most model railroaders, I chose a place that was interesting to me in my childhood. I think you'll find, I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if 80% of model railroaders are replicating some aspect of their childhood. And so, you know, CP Bethlehem was an interesting location from a mix of traffic, but we had different types of traffic on the different routes, plus all that history. And so you had sort of new and modern of trailer trains, road railers, things like that. And then you had the classic manufacturing coal coke ore trains moving through the area. You know, big steel mill, big manufacturing. It was a very exciting place to hang out as a kid. You know, it's not just about the trains for me, but the heavy industry. You know, Brock mentioned I got a new job, so thanks, Brock. I'm working for Transtar, which is the parent company of the Union Railroad and some of the other former U.S. Steel railroads. And it's really neat as an adult in my 40s to be able to sort of put myself back into that mindset as a kid and walk on the grounds of these big steel mills and see trains shoving pig iron cars and cuts of ore. And it's an honor and a privilege to be able to be a part of that. Anyway, back to the models. Another thing about Conrail in the Allentown, Bethlehem area in the 90s was that the CP Rail had taken over the former D&H and always had really interesting kind of wacky consists, wacky trains. And they looked like foreign trains. And so Jeremy had a great photo of the 3 Sioux SD40s on what was probably a 557 train. Here in Allentown, we had, well, I'm in Pittsburgh now, but in terms of this, in Allentown, we had the 265 and 266 trailer trains. You had the 557 and 558 typically running around in Allentown, but sometimes you would see them on the east end of Allentown doing a runaround move. And then the 555 and 556 trains were the manifests for a while that could often be seen in Bethlehem, depending on how the dispatcher moved that traffic around Allentown. So before I get into the train symbol side, I had a couple example photos just to give you some, you know, something to picture. I liberally stole these pictures from the internet. I don't know who took them, with apologies to all those folks. In some cases, these are actually labeled, so that's good. Anyway, CPJU is going to be the sort of the east end of Allentown represented on my model railroad. Here you see on the left a photo of JU Tower. I think it was torn down by 1994, which makes my modeling job a little easier because I'm not good at scratch building. And you can't just go buy a JU Tower, at least not yet. And then on the right, you can see a picture. It's taken in the 2000s, but it gives you a good view of what the JU interlocking looked like. In fact, this area is one of the few places that still looks more or less like it did, other than the fact that the trees have grown in a lot. The Lehigh River Bridge is a neat spot. This photo shows well, and I think I took this one, a curved double diamond where the CNJ crossed over and turned into the Reading, and then a connection track that was built in the 1960s, which you see to the right. This bridge was actually widened to accommodate that track, and I want to say 1967. And so back in that time period, the deck bridge was very brightly colored, but that's all long turned to rust by the 90s. One other interesting thing about this bridge is that the home signal for CP Bethlehem hung underneath the girders, which was removed for the double stack clearance project in 1995. But the year I'm modeling, I'm going to have to figure out how to replicate that. So CP Bethlehem had a lot of features. You know, we have the bridge and the diamond, which is central to it. It passed under the hill-to-hill bridge. There's a Fahey Bridge. A lot of neat history right in that area. On my model railroad, it's going to be almost like a sort of a diorama effect. I think if anybody's visited the Lehigh Keystone Valley folks in Bethlehem, they have a wonderful model railroad that does a very good job of modeling this whole area. My railroad's going to be just a subset of that, but that's all I can fit in my basement. And frankly, it's all I have time for. I don't think I even have time for that. Just ask my wife. So here's a few views of CP Bethlehem to give an idea what I'm going for. The signals you see in this photo at the top right, that was CP 88, which was added by Norfolk Southern for the new Beth Intermodal connection. In 1994, those signals were not there, but still a neat spot. Tom Nanos photo on the left looks like a Doug Lilly on the bottom of the OCS train. I had to find an OCS train for this. These are all views at CP Bethlehem. And of course, there's Bethlehem Steel. So I've been saving up Walther's blast furnaces for the last 20 years. I think I have 3 of them. I'm going to have to figure out how to make them fit on the narrow shelf that I have for it. I'm planning to have both the main tracks and the layoff track for sort of a long siding. And then to some degree, I'm going to cram in some PB&NE, the Bethlehem Steel plant railroad, switching scrap cars and pig iron and slag. So here's what that area looked like. Really neat stuff. So switching into the reality aspect of it, this is a rough layout of what the basement looks like. And, you know, my wife, I've got 4 kids, and so I could not take over the whole basement. This was the result of a lengthy and protracted negotiation. Actually, my wife had the idea to put helixes in the opposing corners and run a shelf layout in between. That is working out pretty well. So I've actually got a lot of railroad crammed into this space. It's a triple level layout, which is, it's tight, but what I'm going for, realistic looking trains and what's going to be a fairly diorama looking layout. So here's a quick look at what that family room layout looks like. Essentially, going back, the helix areas are non-scenery sort of staging looking, and I paint those areas gray just to sort of represent the fact that it's off stage. And then the family room will be scenic. So the top 2 levels will be scenic. So we have in the family room, you're looking toward the back corner, the lower level is a staging area, and then the upper 2 are scenery. And so you'll have in the middle level, the east end of Allentown going east to CPJU. That track will go into the closet and go up a helix and then come back out for Bethlehem, and then working its way out toward Easton. So the basic schematic you'll see here is essentially the east end of Allentown Yard going out to JU. I'll have a piece of the cement secondary just to be able to allow me to run that train and have it go off stage. The staging yard on the lower level ends up becoming the Lehigh Valley main line, the so-called hole from CP Bern into CP Bethlehem. And then we will have a staging area for Bethlehem Secondary, and then trains will continue east on the Lehigh line. So that's illustrating the 3 levels, the 3 shelves that you see in the family room, the lower level being staging, the middle level being the east end of Allentown Yard, and then the upper level being CP Bethlehem east towards Easton. You know, one thing that's interesting about every model railroad has compromises, and one of mine is the fact that there's a helix between CPJU and CP Bethlehem. So in real life, it's something like 20 car lengths between these two locations, and in my railroad, it's more like a hundreds car difference. But the track speed was 10 miles an hour, and it'll help tie up the area just as it was in real life. So you can see here's the two helixes. One is connecting there from JU to Bethlehem, and the other is taking your east end at Easton back down to the staging level. So that's a full track diagram. We're not going to talk through that, but just giving you a sense of what I'm thinking, what I'm building toward. As of right now, only the staging level on the lower level is built, and the helixes are built about halfway up. So you can get a look at the fact that, we're in a family room space. I've got the 3 levels displayed here. The staging area is pretty full in this photo, and then I'm in the middle of building the upper 2 levels. Now I am starting to get to a point where I can actually put track on the middle level. The way I built these shelves was that the top shelf is removable, so I could get it out of my way in order to build the scenery and lay track, put in signals, and so on the middle level. So here's a look at the helix on the far end. This is connecting the staging level up to CPJU. There's a bud car there that's sort of for the kids, but it's also good for testing. That's on the cement secondary, and then the track curving up, continuing up, will end up tying in at CP Bethlehem. One note here is that I've got working signaling in place already using JMRI and CATS. That makes running trains in circles and staging a lot more fun than it would otherwise be. But in some cases, the signals face where you can't really see them. So I'm using small mirrors to make those signals visible. All right, I'm gonna take a second. So here's where the nerdology happens. There was a lot of trains that went through Allentown, and there was a lot of variety. And one of my goals is to capture that variety as much as I can, but there's not a lot of room for me to work with. My staging yard has 5 long tracks. It has 5 short tracks. Those shorter tracks will need to be doubled up to make reasonably prototypical trains of 25 to 30 cars, which, yeah, we could run longer trains, but in my basement, 30 cars is about right. Also, the helix grade is about 2.25%, and so you get much longer than that, and the trains are too heavy to run a realistic number of locomotives. So, taking inspiration from Dave Abelys and his team that did the planning for Dave's operating sessions was to look at this in terms of what freight car consists do I need to have, and then just like Dave, we take those predefined freight car consists and then rotate locomotives to make it look like different trains. So if you've got a Conrail coal hopper train, you'll put one set of power on it, run it east, take it into staging, put different power on it, run it west as a different train symbol at a different time. And for the most part, people won't really think, oh, that's the same cars I saw before. They're going to see the different power. So much of us focus on the locomotives. And I think this will end up having a pretty good effect. So part of my approach to this was to look at the amount of capacity I have in staging and think about how many trains I want to be able to run, and start to hone in on what trains can I run based on what physically fits on the layout with a minimum of hand intervention. So we'll have a gray trailer, so to speak, a trail van train with a heavy emphasis on UPS trailers, whereas we'll have more of a typical non-UPS trailer train, so-called white trailers for some of these other symbols. I've got a road railer ready to go. I'll have a shorter train to represent the D&H with some CP flat cars and CP containers and a couple 20-foot containers. There's lots of unit trains, and in this case, I anticipate running maybe only 2 of these on the layout at a time, because I don't have the room to keep 6 different unit trains. But you had the Conrail ore train. Jeremy Plant had some great photos of the ore trains. the quad hoppers, the 49 series cars, the bathtub cars that were more and more popular in the 90s, and Conrail had some differing symbol series for those. Norfolk Southern Top Gons came in, sometimes on the D&H, sometimes on Conrail. And then we had the CSX bathtubs occasionally showed up as well. So I've got a bunch of hoppers that I've been accumulating in the basement. On the manifest trains, the way I'm working on this, again, it's based on the number of tracks I have in the staging area, and the east end of Allentown Yard is going to serve as a visible staging. And those tracks are really only going to hold 12 to 15 cars each. And so I decided to actually take advantage of the fact that I would need to double up trains and make up different trains by using a pairing of those blocks. Let me get those out of the way. So I'll have 3 blocks of mixed Conrail, sort of generic looking manifest. I'll have one that looks more like, tank cars and UP, BN, Santa Fe, something that would look like it's on a PIOI. I've got a bunch of the NS box cars and Carolyn tank cars to make it look like an SENS or a D&H train. A lot of steel cars, paper cars for the CP trains. And so I can combine these blocks into pairs to make trains that to the astute observer will look like the right type of consist. So for example, the PIBE from Conway to Bethlehem, I'll take a steel, kind of a steel heavy block, combine it with a generic Conrail block and have a train that looks like that. I can take a block of Western Road cars with a Conrail block and have a PIOI or OIPI. I'm not planning to do a ton of switching. There's not a lot of room for that. We will have, there's a little bit of switching, and I've got a couple of jobs planned for that. So there'll be some circulation of these different blocks by virtue of having locals work Allentown Yard and do a little bit of switching. So the second thing I needed to think about was what was the schedule? What really ran on a prototypical basis and on what frequency, and it's going to be tricky to figure out how to actually stage these trains and make it look like it's realistically choreographed. But this aspect of planning a model railroad really is like choreography, needing all the pieces to move in a realistic way from left to right, right to left, and not ending up with a traffic jam on your railroad. Part of the goal is to entertain your operators with interesting trains that they're running and that are passing through. And I like to add stress by making some traffic wait on other traffic, which allows for some quote unquote rail fanning opportunities. But at the same time, if everybody's just standing around, they end up drinking too many beers and it leads to a less productive operating session. So in the mornings in Allentown, you typically had, mail trains going east if you got up really early, which I was in high school, so I didn't do it very much, but a couple of times. You had the NS trains, the 211 and 212. There was often a coal train or train eastbound, your PIOI, PIBE, some eastbound Conway trains, sometimes your westbound Oak Island trains. Sometimes the D&H showed up, the 266 to go east to Oak Island. And then later in the morning, you had your mail trains westbound, sometimes 2 of them. In the afternoon, you often had the NSSE going from up the Lurgan branch up to Selkirk, sometimes empty coal. Locals would come out in the middle of the day, typically, and then a westbound manifest, sometimes an eastbound trailer. In the evening, we had the BEPI coming out of Saucon Yard, the Bethlehem Steel train. The SENS often came west. And then as you got later in the evening, it was usually dark out, but your westbound road railer, TV3, TV11, before that became a double stack train, and the D&H 265. And then some of these other trains could show up anytime. The eastbound road railer, often in the morning, but sometimes late. Sometimes it was a function of the very various schedules those trains had. D&H trains were not scheduled to go east of Allentown, but often did their runaround move at Bethlehem because it was a good way to get them out of the way of the traffic at CP Burn on the west side of Allentown. And you had coal and ore trains that could run pretty much any time. So starting with that concept, I wanted to validate that because, of course, I've been watching trains since the late 80s. I have a lot of memories. I have a lot of crappy pictures. I've looked at a lot of pictures and rail paces over the years. And so it all sort of blends together. And I am going for an accurate representation of 1994, partly because it helps me not buy too many trains, but partly because it helps me not run too many trains. And so having those constraints make it for a more manageable collection and a more manageable schedule. And so I spent a fair amount of time on multimodal ways digging through the Conrail freight schedule books. Here is some examples of the ALOI, Allentown to Oak Island. This is 3 different revisions that took place. So starting out in 1994, we would have been on the schedule on the left. In the summer of 94, they bumped it up at the start time up to 7 in the morning instead of 9 in the morning. And then here at the end of 1994, the ALOI was starting out at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. So I'm not going to go this far and necessarily schedule my trains differently depending on what month it is. I'm taking a tip or taking a lead from Ed Kapuscinski, by the way, to model the dead season. To me, I have a lot of good memories of cold, sunny days with empty tree branches, and that's what I think I'm going to go for. But you know, my railroad is still all track and wire and wood. There's no scenery yet, so we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So I went through the Conrail schedules for the 90s and put together a spreadsheet of all of the trains that came through Allentown and estimated a time or a time range that those trains would have come through Allentown. Obviously, especially the eastbound trains had a high amount of variability in terms of when they could show up, because schedules were really more of a concept of a plan, not something that was all that fixed. Certainly, a train is more likely to leave its home terminal close to a scheduled time, and I think that was the case a lot of times in Allentown. But the trains that came quite a long way to get there had a lot of variability. And so I would then kind of map out what route that train would take on my layout, because obviously some trains went through Allentown Yard, some trains went around Allentown Yard, and some trains could go either way. So this is where it really gets kind of nerdy. So I had to figure out how my trains were going to be built up from those physical blocks, and come up with a plan where this train's going to sit in staging. And it becomes sort of like your Chinese finger puzzle that you'd get, you know, those little toy plastic games that you get frustrated and throw quickly. But essentially, that's what we're dealing with. Is there's a certain number of staging tracks, and you want to fill them with trains because more trains is fun. So you tend to only want to leave 1 or 2 tracks empty. And so the whole question is, how do you run these trains on your railroad? Make sure it's leaving. You're planning it out to take the right route with the right timing and end up in the right place where you have room to put that train. And so I came up with a coding system. Being a computer guy, I like to code things out. So each of these trains has the freight car consists that they're going to take. So the M2, M3, those are manifest. R is a road railer train. TGs are gray trailers. TWs, white trailers, so on and so forth. I don't need to go into all of it, but I came up with a way to have each of those blocks staged in a location. And so this from is which staging track is that block sitting on? And then this is the route that the train's taking. So East Penn is the end of my staging area, and working its way up to JU, and then CP95 is back in staging. So essentially I'm mapping out each train, and there's some commentary as to where I have to do some work. There's loop back tracks that go around the helix. So for example, the road railer needs to turn around before it can come back, because you can't just put an engine on the other end of a road railer train and run it backward. After that, I'm indicating which staging track does that train go to and what train is that block going to be assigned to next. So as you run a train, for example, SEAL has 2 blocks, 2 manifest blocks. When you get to your destination, the train will actually split that back into 2 tracks. And then so the next crew that takes those blocks, well, let's find an example here. Here we go. So ALOI is going to take these 2 manifest blocks from 2 different staging tracks. It basically runs through the layout. It's a functional giant loop. And then once you get to the other side, you split those blocks back out, and then each block ends up turning into one of the locals. So the M4 block from ALOI ends up being the WPL 18 out to Washington, and then the M3 block ends up being the AL 10 out to Manville, New Jersey. So I've got a video here. Give me a second. So many prompts, so many ads. Just give me my video. Here we go. All right. So before I try to play this, because it doesn't often go well on presentations like this, I'll just describe a little bit what you're looking at. But I needed to be able to actually visualize what the heck I'm doing in my exercise to make sure it's going to work. And so I made a map that showed all my tracks in 15 car capacities, and then made little cards with each block on it, and then had little tags with the train symbol. So you'll see at the top of this, and I know it's a little small, but this is the east end of Allentown Yard. There's going to be 6 15-car tracks there. And so there's several manifest blocks starting out this sequence. And then down in my staging area, which is the bottom left, the 2 main tracks up to Easton, and then 5 short tracks, 5 long tracks. And you'll see that I've got an OIPI on 2 in the park. I've got a male 44 and a male 4 on 4 and 5 in the park. And then over in the short half of the staging yard, there's a DNH 265, and I've got 2 tracks that are slated for a UFM coal train up to PP&L in Martins Creek. And then the helixes are pretty long, and they give me the ability to stage a train sort of off stage in the helix too. So the way this is set up, I've got an SEAL on a helix, and then a road railer train sitting kind of getting ready to come out to Easton. So I'm going to try to play this. This might work, it might not. It's not all that terribly long. So it's just a time lapse as I'm moving the trains through, following the plan that I put together. And there were a couple of revisions, but long story short is it worked out. I'll be able to run the trains that I want. It'll follow a logical sequence. It's not going to be too complicated for operators to figure out when we give them instructions. And finally, now that I know exactly what freight car consists I need to have, it helps me prioritize which cars I need to buy and which cars I can stop buying, because certain things are just too fun. So in 1 minute's time, I just simulated a 24-hour sequence in the Allentown and Bethlehem area. with my crazy plan of manifest and trailer blocks running as different symbols, and was able to capture a pretty representative portion of the traffic in that area. So that is it. Appreciate you listening to my Conrail Nerdology. If anybody has questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks again.
Thanks, Alex. You know, a unique way to try and put a layout into a very tight space that also you're sharing with family, and you know, you have the couch right there and everything. I think certainly having the helixes on the ends really are a unique perspective out of sight when you're in that family room, but pretty unique. And I'm sure a lot of people have the same situation space-wise, and also regarding the negotiations with your spouse in making all that happen. So appreciate the time and the insight into all of that for sure.
Thanks, Brock.
So with that, this is the last quarterly meeting we have for 2021. We really hope that coming up next year that we will be able to use a format that allows virtual as well as an in-person meeting to happen, so we can get as many people involved and seeing the presentations as we can. As always, you can certainly check these meetings out afterwards once they are posted. I do see that John has a question or a comment regarding the oral history, so I will let him make his piece with that as well. So fire away, John.
Yeah, it just strikes me, especially during the office car book presentation, it strikes me that a lot of this ability to create oral histories falls in the laps of those of us who are ex-cons, you know. So all of my fellow ex-cons who are listening, you know, take note. I saw Howard Smith on, you know, I know Doug Watts is on. I think it behooves us to do two things. First off, just start jotting down stories and memories from our careers, even if it's just bullet points or outlines that we can ultimately share with other people, maybe turn into articles or something, but at least just write down the notes and the memories, because I know from my experience, the little gray cells don't function as well now as they did 5 years ago. And the second part is let's reach out to, let's consider reaching out to some of our fellow ex-cons and encourage them to do the same, or offer the opportunity to maybe interview some of our fellow coworkers to and get that stuff written down or get it on audio, because you know, off the top of my head, I think of two gentlemen who passed away, you know, over the last you know, 5 to 10 years, John Lasson and Jack Chester, and I'm really kicking myself for not picking their brains more about what they did. I know John Lasson had a wealth of knowledge about train blocking and train briefs and that sort of stuff. And man, you know, that, you know, once people like that pass away, it's really tough to reconstruct that kind of history. So I think we ought to, those of us especially who work for Big Blue, have an obligation to start collecting this information and putting it down.
Just to
100%. Oh, go ahead, John.
that was me. Just to expand on that a little bit, you know, if anyone's interested in doing the interviews, we actually have a list of people that of Conrail veterans that have expressed their willingness and interest in being interviewed, and we've got sample interview questions, because the list is probably 50 people long now. You know, so if anyone, you know, if you know somebody and you don't know how to get started, or if you you know, would, you know how to get started but don't know somebody, either way, let us know. We can certainly help you get, kind of get your feet under you doing interviews, and getting the stuff recorded. I would do it myself, but it's a matter of time. And, I just, it's either that or we have a quarterly magazine every quarter. So, I pick one. So
I second John McLaughlin's. Hi, John. Haven't seen you in a long time.
Hi. Wow. Oh, man. Good to
Some
see you,
years
John.
ago, I got Brock hooked up with Fletcher to show up at the Conrail luncheons. And my thought at that time, and remains that way, is to have Brock and company do kind of a StoryCorps booth, if you will, off in a corner somewhere where people can be rounded up and shoved in front of a microphone for a little while. I'm sure that there'll be more stories after that. But I was thinking earlier on when I saw the presentation of storing all these signals and stuff like that. And I scratched my head and said, why? Because I went to Michigan State University back in the mid 70s, and a bunch of us on campus started tinkering with the steam locomotive, which eventually got to run. But at the same time, we were offered an awful lot of stuff by the Grand Trunk and by the CNO. They were just cleaning stuff out. And we said, no, we don't want this stuff. We're going to work on 1225 and that's it. So I wonder about, the utility of storing things like, a PRR position line signal when maybe that belongs to some PRR museum. But following up on what John was saying, I think the priorities are people, since they're perishable. Number two, records, which are just about as perishable. And then number three, equipment that's unique specifically to Conrail, not a position line signal, which could have been a couple different places. But that was just a comment that I had wanted to make. The only other comment I have was that in your research on the business cars, how did a Hancock air whistle get on those locomotives? Did that ever come up? I'll go back on mute.
No, it's fine. I know Wes isn't here. We couldn't find out reasons why that was put on.
I'm not complaining. My family used to go on vacation in August to the Berkshires back in like the 60s, and that's all you'd hear at night of these great air whistles going by on New Haven trains.
Yeah, so the person that was in charge of the office cars early on is no longer with us. So we could not find out if there was a specific reason why 4022 ended up with that. We do know the reason why they were removed. There was a grade crossing accident near Pittsburgh with an office car train, and the problem became, number one was they were not very loud, and number two, the age of people as time went on, they didn't recognize, because that sounded like a steam engine, and as time went on, people didn't recognize the sound of a steam engine whistle as time progressed. So they were all, three of them were removed from the E8s after that grade crossing accident. Unfortunately not a reason why one was put on, but we do know why they were taken off.
I was just curious all these years. Thank you.
No, for sure. No, and I echo John's statements that it's something as a board, we are always balancing what is Conrail specific and those, saving those things that, possibly, there may be other things that were Conrail that are saved somewhere else. And we certainly look at equipment that was Conrail specific or that is not preserved somewhere else. The FlexiFlow was a big that discussion came up in a major way for that car. There are some ongoing discussions for some other opportunities that we have that we are looking at. But 100% people, records, and then down to the equipment for sure.
Was that a merchant's dispatch car, the MDT?
Excuse me?
The Flexiflow car, was that an MDT car?
No, that never made it to MDT. That was that car was converted to a scale test car actually,
Okay.
and was in scale test service on Conrail for its entire career.
Okay.
Also, speaking of unique Conrail equipment, if anyone has $30,000, call us because we have an opportunity that requires that. So
We do. It just came up this week, and we're having discussions on our what our position will be on things. So there's always opportunities coming towards us. We're always trying to keep the organization's best interest in mind, financially and for longevity, as well as making sure that we can take care of the pieces that we do have.
That's what it comes down to is can you actually, it's just a parking space to watch it disappear into a pile of rust flakes. And that's why we said no. I mean, it's just like you go to Steamtown. It's just horrible to look at what they have there. It's just rusting.
Yep, it is certainly tough to keep up with rust. It never stops. It never stops. So thank you to everyone, our presenters today. Alex, wonderful job. Jeremy, just fantastic images of an era we all love. And Wes, I certainly couldn't have done the book without him. We are incredibly happy with the product, and we thank Rudy for all of his assistance. His fingerprints are all over that book in helping us bring that to a reality after so many years. So thank you all for your time, your support. Remember, keep promoting the CRHS, gift memberships, the holiday. Get out there and reach out, speak to people about what's happening with the CRHS. There's a lot of good things that are happening here versus what has transpired in the past a couple years back, and a lot of people have worked very hard to get us moving in the right direction, and we're certainly at the top of the mountain with what the society has been doing over the last 15 years. So very excited to keep moving forward and seeing what 2022 brings for us, and hopefully we can get together and be together, because that is certainly a big part of the society and coming together, and hopefully that fares better for us in the next year. So thank you all very much. And
Thank you.
Yep, have a good holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year.
Be well.
Everyone.
Thank you.